Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the Wednesday, June 10th, 2015 episode of Free Webinar Wednesdays. This is a newly acquired 45-year-old Eric Cook joining you from WSI Internet Consulting, where we work with businesses and organizations and helping them better understand and leverage the power of the Internet as a strategic business tool. You can learn more about me in WSI online at www.poweredbywsi.com. With me this week is my good friend and Free Webinar Wednesday partner, Mr. Jeff Simpkins. Jeff, say hello to everybody out there in Free Webinar Wednesday world.
Greetings, everybody. This is Jeff Simpkins. I'm with Community Bank Consulting, Inc. And you can learn more about me and Community Bank Consulting online at www.communitybankconsulting.com.
Hey, did you like my attempt at stretching my birthday into at least one more week there, Mr. Simpkins? My wife was born in February, so she takes the entire month. So I figure if I get a little bit on the front and the back end, it's probably not so bad. So yeah, but anyway, I am looking forward to today's show for a number of reasons. Much like Jeff and I go back many years as friends, and I've always said one of the best parts about Free Webinar Wednesdays is the fact that it gives Jeff and myself an excuse to talk to each other. Bill Donius, who's our guest today, is a friend of mine that I have not seen for years, and we'll talk a little bit more about kind of how we got to know each other once we formally kick things off. But I'm looking forward to this, both professionally and personally, because I've been through his book and he's got some really intriguing ideas. But he's just a great guy, and Bill and I haven't talked in a while, and I'll try not to monopolize too much of the conversation today because I want to make sure our audience gets a lot of really good ideas from him. So before we officially kick off and get Bill introduced, I want to remind everybody that Free Webinar Wednesdays is recorded and made available at freewebinarwednesdays.com. So after today's show, if you're interested in catching a recording, you can stop by and share it with a friend or a colleague. And also, as a point of reference, we do love to get interaction and feedback. So if you've got questions or comments for Bill today, feel free to use the chat function in the control panel, which is likely in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. We'll keep an eye on that. And when there's a break in the conversation, we'll go ahead and we will ask it for you. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and work the magic of GoToWebinar, and I'm going to send Bill a request to become the actual presenter. And while that is doing its thing, I guess I'll officially welcome Bill to the show, but just to maybe paint a little bit of background, Bill and I got to know one another at a banking conference many moons ago when I was still a rather fresh newbie in the banking space. And I sat in on a presentation that Bill was giving for the American Community Bankers, which is an association that doesn't even exist anymore. And he was talking about recently coming into the bank, working with his father, as I did, and how he was analyzing his customer makeup and realized that a majority of his customers were older certificate of deposit customers. And Bill's not one to mince words, basically said in his presentation, if we stayed the way that we were staying, all of his customers would be dead in 10 years and the bank would be out of business. So he knew he had to do something different. And that intrigued me because he was somebody that liked to think outside of the box and a progressive-minded individual. He opened up his bank to me as a mentor, and I went down and visited and brought some ideas back to my institution. So I very much appreciate the mentorship that he provided me while I was a community banker. And he has since moved on, and I'll let him tell his story, but paints a little bit of picture about how I know Bill, and I'm very excited to have you on the show. So with that being said, Bill, I'm going to shut my mouth and officially welcome you to Free Webinar Wednesdays, and thanks for being our guest today.
Thanks, Eric. I really appreciate the invitation, and you're too kind. I didn't even remember that all those good things happen.
Well, I will say we also participated in a Habitat for Humanity build. I think it was in Las Vegas, and there was a nice picture of you and I wearing hard hats, and that got into one of the magazine's trade journals. But I know we always had fun together, and I do remember you bonking me on the head with an 8-pound mallet as well. So it wasn't always smiles and giggles, but I know you hit me with love. So so that was kind of fun too.
I actually am kidding. I do remember all of that, and I remember the fact that you were very talented and bright and willing to make a big difference at your bank, and you did. So congratulations to you too.
Yeah. So cool. Well, we want to talk about your book and learn a little bit more about you. And we've chatted briefly through LinkedIn and text messages over the years. But I guess maybe tell us a little bit about your book, its evolution, how you kind of became inspired by it, because it's definitely a different way of thinking, and creates a little bit of discomfort, I imagine, when people kind of sit through and are challenged to do what the book suggests to do.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I may start, I presume you can see the screen, and I may start with a story that explains how some of this works. I was on an airplane 6 years ago, and seated next to me was the former COO of Enterprise Rental Car, and Rick is a very impressive guy, and was there 40 years, helped to grow and fund what is a really successful company today, and one that I admire, and one of the largest private companies in St. Louis, and one of the biggest rental car companies in the world. They have 1 million cars on the road. He was sitting next to me, and so I said, well, Rick, when you're thinking about business and if you were to grow the bottom line today, what kind of ideas and recommendations would you send to the CEO? And he was thoughtful and wrote down a couple things, and then we met a week later at Starbucks, and I asked him, well, what do you do when you're trying to, think outside the box and you really want the big, cool stuff? What do you do? And he kind of just shrugged and said, well, I don't know. And I thought, wow, this is, a super successful guy who was at a company for 40 years, turned it into one of the biggest companies in the world in their field, and there wasn't any one process that he did to do this. And so I said, well, what if I could show you a tool in a couple minutes that could help you think outside the proverbial box? And he said, sure, I'm up for it. I'm retired. I have the time of a super nice guy. And so we did that, and then in just a couple minutes, he wrote down something using this tool. And I said, well, what do you think about the ideas you just came up with this time for, how to grow the bottom line? What do you think of those ideas? And he slammed his fist down the table and goes, wow, that's a big idea. And so I said, well, what did you write? And he said, I think I really unlocked something here. I wrote down what I think is a really terrific insight. And I said, can I see it? And he said, sure. And he showed me that one word. And I didn't really, this was 5-6 years ago, and I didn't really quite understand that from, his perspective. And that's what's really fascinating about this work, because it's about people tapping into their own, unlocking their own brain and getting those kind of big aha ideas. And so he had written down that word. And then over the last 5 years, the company's done exactly that. And I'm not sure what the exact cause and effect was there, but because he was retired, but he was still very much mentoring executives at the company. So they went into Europe, and they've gone much more globally. They have 1 million cars on the road, a really terrific company. So the insight was, what if we could all sort of unlock those big ideas on demand and have the big impact in the company? And so that's really the sort of backstory to what really moved me forward with the book in terms of taking this into the business world, because I knew that it had worked well with individuals. I had, after leaving the bank at age 50 and financially able to do so, I was really blessed and lucky that way. I had a great team, and the company did really well, and we grew 8-fold in a 12-year period that I was CEO, so we were in a good position. So at age 50, when I was financially able to quit and go out and do this work, I was really fascinated about how some people were able to easily get those big ideas, and some people, not so much. And I did 200 interviews, found in those interviews that people could learn to apply this neuroscientific breakthrough result to kind of tap into their kind of what I would call their inner genius or their right hemisphere of their brain and get some big, fascinating ideas. So in those 200 interviews, I really saw the power of what people could unlock. And it was really more about, it seemed like, unlocking their full potential. And that's what really empowered me to go forth. And I really wasn't necessarily thinking it was going to be a book, but the stories became powerful enough that it turned into the book. And so I've been out there then since the first book came out in 2012. Simon & Schuster did the updated version of the book, incorporating business experiences that I've had since then. And it's been really fun going into these great big Fortune 500 companies, working with them to help them unlock things that otherwise they may get stuck by. So that's kind of a big nutshell how it all started.
Yeah. Well, the name of today's, I guess, webinar has got, unlocking your brain's hidden app. And, in the write-up it talks about the fact that whether we're complacent or we don't know really how to turn that app on, but it sounds like just even in that quick conversation you had with the gentleman from Enterprise, you were able to activate his app and get him to do something that he had not thought of, it sounds like, in years prior. I'm curious, when you did the interviews, what were the questions that you were asking? What sort of information were you pulling out of those interviews? Was it just confirming something that you already suspected, or were you looking for direction?
Well, it was it was typically I would ask him the same 2 or 3 questions each for consistency, but then we would typically thereafter take on whatever the interview candidate was interested in taking on. So it might be like, they may have a question of like, gosh, what should I do next? I'm not happy in my current job, or, I'm having a problem with my spouse. I wonder why, or, why I don't get along with my mother-in-law. All kinds of questions that kind of the run-of-the-mill every day, but more importantly, the kind of bigger picture questions that we have in life. They would typically take on those questions, and then we use this process, this tool, to dig in and sort of get either a validating or perhaps in many cases a different answer to that same question.
Very cool. Okay. So I see that there's a what looks like a big letter T on the screen. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, and and what I do oftentimes with audiences is sort of a way for them to experience their own innovation, their own creativity, is to look at this image. And if people are sitting at a desk and have paper and pen nearby, they may want to try this in real time and experience it for themselves. But to just simply draw, or not draw as much as write as many things as you think this image represents. So just, write down whatever comes to mind. And, it might be one thing, it might be, as many, and just if they just go ahead and do that.
Okay.
You might try it too, Eric, and see what you come up with.
I am writing. I don't know if you heard my pen click, but I'm actually writing as I speak.
Okay, this is to give a little bit of a reveal here. This is one of the tests that are administered in grade school to measure creativity. So you notice I said write down as many things as you think this image represents. What happens with a lot of us is especially as we get older in life, I'm 56, so I've got a good 10 years on you, we tend to get stuck in kind of creatively thinking. We may come up with 2 or 3 things or 4 things we think this is, and then we're like, I can't think of anything else. Well, many people that are able to access, and typically people, if you were to ask this of a 5-year-old, they might be able to come up with, 15 different things that this represents. And what NASA learned years ago when they wanted to figure out who they should put in their creativity groups and innovation groups, they did a study involving hundreds of thousands of of people across the United States, and they made a really interesting discovery. They indeed found one group that scored really high at when it comes to measuring creativity, and they were excited until they found out that this group wasn't exactly very hireable because they were made up of 5-year-olds. And they scored at the 98th percentile, and then in the rest of the population, that number diminished very quickly down to, sadly, a 2% level on that same test. So as at the adults, average age 31. So it really is a way of measuring that we really, as we age, unfortunately, our innovation, creativity skills tends to go by the wayside a little bit. So, so it's sort of hard to hire that 5-year-old. So it's either, finding a way to tap into that inner 5-year-old, that inner Yoda, maybe unlocking the inner genius, so how do we do it? And I was inspired to look at how innovation has happened over the last 400 years and found that there was, all these famous names that we know. Do you think, Eric, and this is a good question for both of you, do you think that they did this group, including even Einstein and Heisenberg and Marie Curie and Isaac Newton, do you think they did their best work late in life when they were older and wiser, or earlier in life?
Jeff, I'll let you go first.
I'm going to guess early in life.
Did you say end of life?
No, I said early in life.
Oh, really? Earlier. Yes. Okay. Good. So that is the right answer. If I had put up this group of innovators, maybe it would have tipped it off and given an extra clue. But the amazing part here, which shocked me, is whether you're talking about Stephen Jobs and Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg is still younger, Sergey Brin, or this group that goes back 400 years that is, also really well known. In both cases, all of these guys and women did all of their best work and their most innovative work, and were actually done by, would you believe, age 30. So some people on the call may be over age 30, right? So what does that mean for us? Those of us that are over age 30, what are our chances of being innovative, creative, coming up with those big ideas? So do we have a path? Yeah, so is there a way that you guys think when you need that big idea, when you need to be creative, intuitive, innovative, what do you do to make that happen?
Is that a rhetorical question, or are you?
No, that's an actual question. I hope you've got an answer.
Yeah. I tend to try to disconnect from the office, and I'll get on my bike and I'll just go out and I'll listen to some motivational music, or maybe some podcasts or some audio that gets me thinking beyond what I'm normally doing, just to try to jog my brain outside of maybe where I might be stuck, and give myself an opportunity to cleanse, I guess is the only word that jumps into my head, but to try to get a clean slate, wash the chalk off the dustboard, and throw some more stuff up and see what might stick.
Okay, well, those are all really good ideas, because it's about breaking the pattern and getting us out of our comfort zone. And so that's good. Jeff, what do you do?
I think I must be a pretty visual guy, because I will, not unlike Eric, I will go to a more quiet place. I might, hang out on the dock with my dogs, but I'll take pen and paper and tend to jot down not necessarily complete sentences and ideas and things like that, but phrases, drawings, and just kind of capture things almost like a mind map. And then I find that by using that approach, I can go back to it later and get more fine-tuning and capture a lot more details.
Fantastic, and I don't mean to share here that there is one right way to do it. I'm sort of agnostic to whatever works. I think it's great that both of you guys have things that you do, and more importantly, things that work for you. And that's really what it's about. Is it's listeners can take those ideas and apply it. It's really about finding what works for you, because I think we live in a world now where we do need more innovative thinking. Things are changing faster in this globally dynamic, complex world, so we're going to have to do it faster, better. So the approach that I learned 16 years ago in therapy about tapping into unlocking the right hemisphere of the brain is yet one other way that I found for me that is my best tool, I guess, for unlocking the brain in a way that allows me to get those fresh, creative, intuitive, insightful thoughts. So that just happens to be my on-demand way of doing it. I know that Steve Jobs, it was reported in Walter Isaacson's great biography on him, went to India for a year and dropped acid. So most of us don't have it's not terribly convenient, right, to leave the country and drop acid. So we have to find some other way that might work for us to make that happen.
On many levels, I would add.
A lot of companies use, SWOT. We know strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat. And to me, that's been around for 50 years. So that almost becomes and defines the box. People use brainstorming, but there are some fundamental flaws with the way sometimes brainstorming is done. They show that big groups actually do worse than smaller groups. Some people lose their thought while somebody else is speaking. We have this whole notion of quiet people who aren't used to speaking up in groups and in a brainstorming session kind of voicing their idea. Sometimes we get empowered, are intimidated by the person who's more senior, more tenured in charge, and we tend to shy away from thinking what we're saying or not, or just not saying much because we don't want to be judged. So the result of all that with SWOT, brainstorming, and all these inherent problems is that I see companies that get, stuck basically in their habituated thinking and routines, and they're expecting a different answer, but they're just getting more of the same. So we've been warned, right, about what that means. I'm not calling any of us insane, but that there can be that problem. So the question that sort of sent me forth in doing this work over the last 7 years is, how, and I saw this in these 200 interviews, is it's really about helping people get unstuck, because so often we're stuck either in our personal life in some way, as I was 16 years ago when I went into therapy to get unstuck, or we're stuck in a business, in a job, in a position that just doesn't work as well for us. So you want to hear a little story?
Absolutely.
I love stories.
So the really fascinating backstory here is that in all the way back to 1931, there's a star athlete named Roger, and he's also a gifted academic, and he wins a scholarship to Oberlin College. And he perhaps would have become a banker like his father, but he happened into a intro to psych class that was taught by Dr. Raymond Stetson, who had studied under none other than William James, who's one of the lead thinkers in American psychology. And he would have perhaps gone on to be a banker like his father and like Eric and I, but thank God he didn't, because the world doesn't need another banker, right, Eric? We need maybe. And I can say that as a former banker, clearly, but he had what, in the story, I guess, would be meaningless, absent what we might call today the creative collision that happened, because young Roger was volunteered to be a good guy and drive around his handicapped professor, Raymond Stetson, who was in a wheelchair, and he took him to all these amazing meetings where he got to listen in on all these really cool ideas about the brain and the 30s, and science and psychology, and the fusion of all that was happening. And young Roger got hooked and got his master's, PhD, went on to work at the NIH, Harvard, Caltech, and lo and behold, did work with split brain patients, those whose brains were where the corpus callosum was split, and who the left and right hemispheric functions were separate. And Roger really got inspired by all this, and it became his life's work. And you see him pictured there, won a Nobel Prize in 1981 for his discovery of hemispheric division in the brain and how the brain works and the functions, and what we today know more commonly as the sort of left brain functions, the right brain functions. And scientists would say we use all of our brain all the time, but these functions are thought to be isolated in certain halves of the brain. And the 92% of Americans, interestingly enough, are right-handed, controlled by the left hemisphere of the brain. And so when you look at these things that the left hemisphere controls, linear, logical, rational, all these things are pretty much the way we work in business, right? Goal orientation, time-based, speech, writing, logic, make perfect sense in business because we need to, keep the lights on, pay the bills, keep the business running. In our lives too, all these things make sense. But however, when you look at the right hemisphere stuff, it's very different. It's wholeness, expression, music, artistry, creativity, emotion, dreaming, intuition, spirituality. And then when I saw this one and discovered this years ago, it's like, wow, that makes so much sense based on the way it had been so helpful for me. I saw problem solving, and it suddenly, the light bulb went off. I thought, aha, no wonder this approach that helped me, that I learned in therapy 16 years ago, applying this tool for tapping into the right hemisphere of the brain, no wonder it helped me kind of work through a personal problem. It took me years to think maybe I should use this in business too, but when I did, I was like, aha, this is a really helpful business tool too. And it made sense. Why? Because it's the right hemisphere is also known as that problem-solving kind of part of the brain. So that's what made a lot of sense. So now, Roger's discovery was really one of helping us on a more reliable basis to learn how to truly think outside the box, in my view, how to think differently, how to be more creative, how to be more innovative. And his great discovery laid the basis for all that. So my insight, now we see even Mercedes-Benz appealing to our right brain to buy a powerful car. So my insight was really one of translating that neuroscientific discovery into a business process that we could leverage into, a style, a methodology that we could use to be more creative, more intuitive, a better problem solver. So that's what my thought was that we could really take this and, translate what has already been used in psychology through the whole inner child movement over the last 30 years, what has already been used in the art world through Dr. Betty Edwards' book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. I studied under Dr. Lucia Capagnoni for a year, who has written 16 books applying psychology. So my thought was, gosh, in business, we don't have any of this. Or in mainstream America, we don't use this at all. So how can it be that this discovery was made in 1981, yet we haven't incorporated or used any of this? So that was the real notion and kind of breakthrough aha for me, was this stuff needs to get out there. So those 200 interviews inspired the book, which is much more directed at basically anyone in their personal life or in business that they could learn how to teach themselves this tool, use it in their personal life or in business, and basically, essentially be more creative, more intuitive, get be a better problem solver, get in touch was the whole basis. It's pretty disruptive. And it's very different than the more linear. And not that there's anything wrong with this, but my thinking is we need more than just the linear approach to how to do things. It doesn't have to be an either or, it's an and we need a more creative, intuitive approach to tap in, get us to think about things that we wouldn't typically think about. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. You think the right brain, left brain, the banker versus, just using my personal experience, banker versus digital marketer. Not to say that I didn't try to think outside of the box and be creative as a banker, but it's certainly much more of a requirement when you're dealing specifically on the marketing side. And in the digital space, things are changing so quickly, and even in the banking space, there's new competitors showing up every day to community banks that are pushing the envelope with different ways to connect with the millennials, which are of that younger mindset, looking at things differently. It's really, it's ringing true for me. This is really hitting home.
Yeah, so my supposition is that we can get unstuck, and we can by unlocking sort of more of our full potential in life, and this was viewed as sort of the way I could give back in my own small way, is helping people unlock their full potential. And the best way to do that seemed to me to be to unlock what I would call our inner genius, is the way to get unstuck, move forward, and that is what really has, in the companies that I've worked with since, has been the way to activate the brain differently and get those sort of big aha ideas. And I saw that in one of the first companies I worked with here in St. Louis, which was Crown Vision. And they had, they brought, I think it was 40-something managers to their strategy session. Typically, they'd only have their top 6, and I convinced Matt Matthews, the CEO, to bring all of them to this ideation session around the company's future, and it was something they did every year. And in that singular session, there was one of their more junior managers, Allison, whose right brain idea unlocked the reason why the company hadn't been successful at selling eyewear at the upper end of the market. That and 4 or 5 other ideas that all of the team came up with led to a 19% bottom line increase in 2009 for the company. When their competitors were down 20 to 40%, they were up 19%. So they proved to be a great guinea pig company and proved that this process could work really well as an innovative business tool. So when they mentioned this process when the CEO got up in front of the regional chamber and said, gosh, we did this thing with our management team. It was only 3.5 hours long one time, and it led to a 19% bottom line increase for that year, and we've sustained it since. That really made a big impact, and the phone started ringing, and other people started calling, and we had the great honor and opportunity to work with a lot of these great prestigious brands and companies all around the world, mostly in the U.S. Since then, and it's been really fun helping companies kind of unlock what's possible, and unlock either a way to improve the bottom line or solve a specific issue or problem, and that's what this work has really been about. And I found that if companies do it and they solve a corporate problem or they have a corporate question that they're taking on, the other side benefit is that the employees, once they are laboring on behalf of the company to solve something for the company, if they like the process and they like the technique, they can then apply it to their personal lives and say, gee, I'm having a problem about this or about that. Let me see if I can use this simple tool to help me do resolve this problem or think differently about this problem as well. So I don't know another way to really activate our brain in a way that we can really kind of test for the independence, if you will, of hemispheric. You really feel it for yourself because you really can get a sense for understanding the hemispheric division in the brain that actually occurs. And typically it's a little harder to perhaps do this on a webinar, but typically I would take an audience through the process and so they could experience it for themselves. I do have an example of this in my TEDx talk that's on my website, williamdonius.com. It was from last year, and 1,100 people in the audience all got to kind of go through this process and one of the simple initial questions that I ask, and kind of got to experience it for themselves. So it's one thing when it's theory, but it's another thing when you learn something new, like riding a bike, and you get to experience it for yourself. It's like, wow, I kind of really see what this is all about, because 60 seconds later, I got a very different answer to the same question that I answered only 60 seconds earlier with a very different answer. So that's what, when we're activating the brain in a different fashion and activating the right hemisphere, it feels different, the answer is different, the experience is different, and it's not just different, but it wouldn't be valuable if it was just different. It's also oftentimes better. It's a better answer. Like Allison's answer was a better answer that everyone liked at her table, and then ultimately they voted on that as being one of the best answers coming out of that session. And 22, I think it was, of the people in that session followed her into a breakout session to talk more about what that idea would look like. So it's really being able to harvest these kind of aha insights on demand and kind of make those kind of come through for us in a very real way that can make a difference and kind of impact the bottom line even.
Bill, you gave the similarity to like riding a bike, and I guess exploring that idea further, when you finally learn how to ride a bike and it clicks, people say, you don't forget how to ride a bike, you just hop on and ride, because you can't unlearn how to ride a bike. When this process that you're referring to clicks with the audience, or people that are reading the book, or the process, is it something that you have to consciously make an effort to try to force yourself to do that on an ongoing basis, so that you're continually shifting yourself into a different mode? Or when it clicks, does it just feel like riding a bike and it just starts happening as more of a general course, and you're going to have that insight or that ability much more naturally than having to fight for it every single time you get to a point where you need to make a decision or pick a solution, something along those lines?
Yeah, that's a great question, Eric, and if it's done correctly, it should be like riding a bike. And the reason that the book is embedded with 55 questions, not that a reader has to take all of them on, but is to give the reader practice at how this works. Because once you do question after question using the same process, it is like riding that and getting to know and learn how to ride that bike, getting on off the bike a number of times. So the toughest part about this for most people, especially some of us that are over 50, is that it's hard to suspend disbelief, because we have to be willing to trust that it's possible that we can activate our brain in a different way and have a thought occur to us, strangely enough, without us thinking about it in the traditional way we think about it. So that idea just kind of surfaces, and it's very bizarre in a way, but it's based on how our brain is wired and the neural pathways that are there and how this process gets activated. And that's the first question I typically have people take on, is an experience is just to write an answer to that question. So I guess we could try it on a webinar if you wanted to.
Yeah, as I look at the clock, we've got 15 minutes left, and it would be great if we could somewhat reveal the process or provide an overview of what it is that you're referring to, because I think, I've picked through the book and I kind of have an idea of where you're headed. But for folks that maybe haven't been exposed to this, I think we're in the build-up process, and they're kind of like, okay, well, how did you do it? What did you learn in therapy 16 years ago? What is it that that drives this process? And I don't want to leave people on a cliffhanger, but so maybe in the last 15 minutes, explain that, give them some ideas, even if it's not possible to totally get the switch to flip, which I know it won't be. But I think that's a good area where we can maybe focus on closing under that.
Yeah, and
that's possible.
Absolutely, and I very much, I'm into helping people learn this, and and it's I mean, it's great if they buy the book, but they can learn this right here, right now, without having to buy the book as well. So the question I'd like everyone to try is this question. It's pretty straightforward and simple, obviously. Just write down an answer to this question. If I were an animal, what animal would I be? Write down your answer. This question is and the way we answer it is also sort of a proxy, if you will, for the way we think traditionally and conventionally, right? Because perhaps we might think about one or two possibilities, or maybe three, and then we have to narrow it down and write something down on the page, right? Is that the experience that you guys had?
For me, it was, yes.
Okay. So now, as they say in Monty Python, and now for something completely different. If we are, in fact, going to attempt to activate the right hemisphere of the brain, the process for this is to activate that right hemisphere by using our non-dominant hand. So a lot of times people get this confused as a handwriting exercise, which if it was, it would fail miserably, because I can guarantee handwriting is going to be worse. So what I'd like you guys to do is just to warm up, is to put the writing instrument into your non-dominant hand. It's most likely your left hand, because as I said, 92% of Americans are right-handed. So whatever hand it is, just an attempt to write your name with, just to prove that you can actually do it with that non-dominant hand. So were you guys able to do that?
Here because I broke my dominant hand at one time and have practice.
Ah, good. That may have been a huge plus for you in life, because that's a way of kind of forcing your brain to, think differently. In the course of doing the research, I met one novelist who is able to write her novels, and she's a professor too, and a very highly regarded one. She writes her novels long-handed with her dominant right hand, and then simultaneously edits them in the margin with her left hand. So it's like, wow, really? And she was like, yep. And so I said, gosh, I have to see it to believe it. So lo and behold, she did do that for me, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. It was reported that Leonardo da Vinci could paint a painting with one hand while simultaneously writing a letter or something with his other hand. So there are ambidextrous people out there that that can bat with one hand, do other things with the other hand, that can be doing things simultaneously and different things with both hands. So the brain is a lot more capable. Gabby Giffords had the bullet go through her left hemisphere, which is where grammar is thought to be, and the plasticity of the brain is such that it's enabled her to learn how to speak again, but it's been slow because she has use of the right hemisphere, but she's had to kind of map over how to figure out how to do that. So it's really interesting. So what I'll invite you to do this time now is, unlike what you did the first time, where you were thoughtful about your answer, presumably, and you wrote something down and you thought about it actively, this time I want you to and I invite you to let your brains go blank. You might want to close your eyes for a second, reset your brain, and not have any thought process go on, and trust that it is possible for an idea to be activated by simply holding the pen in your non-dominant hand. You might squeeze it a time or two, and there are studies done at Yeshiva University correlating with the squeezing of a ball with the activation of the right brain and the more creative answers that the participants had. So just the squeezing of a ball boosted creativity. So what I'd like you to do is take a moment, pause, take a breath or two, no judgment. I'm going to read a question to you. Just write down whatever comes to mind with your non-dominant hand, right brain to non-dominant hand onto the page. The question is, if I were an animal, what animal would I be? Bam. Write it down on the page.
Read the question again, please.
If I were an animal, what animal would I be? Bam. Write it down. Whatever comes to mind. No judgment. Just write it down onto the page with your non-dominant hand. You get something?
Got it.
Okay, so
Joe?
So here's my prediction. 90% of the over 10,000 people that have done this with me in the last 7 years, and certainly the first 200, get two different answers, sort of, I think, validating hemispheric division in the brain. Because how is it that we can answer the exact same question with two different answers? 80% of the people that do this get just in their process write down one of only 4 animals: dog, cat, horse, or bird with their dominant hand. So I think what we're doing with the dominant hand, or maybe more traditional, conventional thought process, is we're answering in a way that's aspirational with an animal that's more familiar to us and that we would aspire to be. Then I hear you laughing. Then what happens next, though, with the non-dominant hand is very different. It's like all of a sudden a different brain takes over, and we get an answer that I found is much more representationally true for how we are in life. So it's like, wow, it's like a different brain takes over and says, oh no, Eric, if you were actually an animal, you would be more like this. And so what did you say to that?
Well, my first answer verified your 90%. I said golden retriever because we have goldens, and to me, a golden retriever is the epitome of friendliness and undying affection. But when I put the actual pen in my hand, even before you had me close my eyes, as soon as the pen went in my hand, the word dolphin jumped into my head.
Okay, so
I have no idea why.
Well, I'll tell you what. It's very likely it's not a coincidental answer. And when people don't know why, I invite them to take the spouse test. So ask your spouse, honey, am I more like a golden retriever or a dolphin? And what I found, strangely enough, most people will say that their spouse will say, gee, actually, if I think about it either literally or metaphorically, what those animals do, I bet she would say you're more like a dolphin. When you think of how dolphins, play and swim in schools and like the water and the ocean, and I don't know, could any of that be true for you?
Yeah, and as I kind of try to dissect it in my head as well. So.
But for most people, you don't have to try to second guess, because the really cool thing in the second question, I think, in the book is, what characteristics do I share with a dolphin? And then you go back through with your dominant hand and write down those characteristics, whatever comes to mind. And then you use the same process of suspending disbelief to write down the characteristics that you share with a dolphin that come from your right brain. And it's almost like when you activate that right brain, the same brain, if you will, that gave you dolphin, from the same place in your brain that gave you dolphin, will give the characteristics that you share with a dolphin. And those are where the big insights start to happen. Because it's like, wow, I wasn't even thinking of that, and all of a sudden I wrote down these answers that are really helpful and interesting. So
I want Jeff. I want to make sure Jeff gets to share because I'm curious. I have a sneaking suspicion he may have also picked dog for his first answer, but I don't know. Jeff, are you up for sharing?
Yeah, I did pick dog, although I'm a chocolate lab instead of a golden retriever. I wrote down the same thing the second time, and I'm not going to guarantee you I wasn't too much in my head because I'm kind of in my office environment, and that's kind of what this space is about. I think it could have been different had I been at home or out on my deck or dock.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Jeff. I think that there are perhaps, as I said, about 10% of the people get the same answer, and that's either one of two things: either A, that they're ambidextrous and they have access to both sides of their brain, in a unique, interesting way all the time, so there isn't that they don't need to kind of go there separately. Or B, that because it's new, it's like getting on a bike for the first time without training wheels. We're like, oh my God, I'm going to get on a bike. It's new. It's different. I'm on air. I'm on this webinar. I'm trying to let go. I'm trying not to be too type A. I'm trying to suspend disbelief. I'm trying to let a thought come in. And that can be really tough to do under pressure, kind of right there, as you said. If you try this later at home without the pressure of, having to get some kind of answer on a live show, you might find something different.
It would be interesting to do that because I've been doing a ton of meditation lately. So there's a possibility that I am experiencing the connection.
Yeah, well, that's a great way, and I hope the folks at home, because there's no greater proof, I think, than experiencing this for yourself. Because when you really, and we're this is the tiny tip of the iceberg. The real question is, or the real questions that get interesting are providing aha insights into how do we grow the bottom line. How can I have a better relationship with my spouse? How can I, what's my 5-year plan? How do I solve this problem at work? How do I get along better with a coworker? What's the highest and best purpose of my life? So I invite people to take on all of those bigger questions because that's the really heavy-duty, meaty stuff that's important in life that can make a big difference. And that oftentimes we don't tend to think that creatively about or that differently about. So this process is one way that can help people do that.
Yeah. Those of you that are listening live, if you are interested and if you did the exercise yourself, if you were a dog and then became a dolphin or had some other switch of animal, if you'd like to share that in the chat, I think that would be kind of a curious thing to take a peek at if you're willing to share. So that'd be kind of cool. So in the last couple of minutes then that we have together, maybe close with some insights or somebody interested in taking the next step. How can somebody learn more about you? Obviously, the Thought Revolution is available through a variety of outlets, and but what's the best way to learn more and to stay engaged?
Sure.
1 second before you answer, I want to share some of the stuff that's coming in chat.
Excellent.
We had a dominant honeybee, non-dominant tiger. We had a dog, panther. We had elephant. You can read that one, Eric.
Went from I don't know if you've heard this one before, Bill, duckbill platypus to a Komodo dragon.
Actually, I have heard Komodo dragon before.
Yeah, was it preceded by a duckbill platypus?
Not exactly. That's cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, those are good.
What I think it's showing is that there's sort of unlimited creativity out there, and there is this place in our brains that we can learn more about ourselves. I mean, that's really where the journey begins. Is like why do these answers come up? And they're not coming up randomly, and they're not coming up from my brain or your brain or somebody else's. They're coming up from each of us. So that's what's really fascinating, is to think that there's this other whole mechanism inside ourselves, inside our brain, that can help us be more creative and more intuitive, unlock things that we haven't thought of before, make correlations we haven't thought of. So I'm delighted to stay in touch with people, keep in touch. I have a website, williamdonius.com, that I can get messages through. My TED Talk's also on there. I'm on LinkedIn at William Bill Donius. I'm on Facebook as William A. Donius, and if you want to email me directly, it's wdonius@gmail.com, so I can be reached through a myriad of ways. This has been how I spent the past 7 years. It's been a fascinating journey for me, helping people, kind of unlock what's possible, learn more about themselves, helping companies improve the bottom line, think differently in ideation about innovation and strategy. So I'm honored to be a guest. It's been fun. And Eric, it's always great seeing you. Sorry I'm going to be away when you're here in August.
That's a bummer.
Getting to work with all kinds of great companies across the country, a lot of which you saw the names featured. So it's really been terrific. I'll be I'm going to be up in Michigan with the UAW and with their executive leadership and the president, and when you're here in August. So I'll be working hard for them up there, and hopefully helping them be more innovative, more creative, finding ways to do things differently. So
cool.
Thank you very much. It's been an honor to be a guest.
Yeah, well, this was great, and certainly some really good information. We had one more comment come through. Individual had horsed the same first and second time, but then she indicated that she's ambidextrous, which kind of goes back to your theory that if you're able to tap in and you can write with both hands and do things. So yeah, this is amazing stuff, and it's great to hear your voice again, and I'm so happy for where life has taken you and what you're able to do with folks, and definitely a necessity and a value that you're bringing to the world. So this is good stuff. Cool. Jeff, closing thoughts? You gonna start writing with your left hand now?
It's legible, but it's too slow, so no.
And just remember, it's much more so than a writing exercise. It's got to go brain to hand rather than hand to brain. So you really got to keep in mind, we've got to use this only as a tool to activate the right brain.
Very cool.
Bill, thanks for being our guest. Come back again.
Thank you very much. It was fun being on with both of you. I wish you good luck, and talk again soon. Thanks.
Cool. Sounds good. That concludes today's free webinar Wednesdays. I want to thank Bill Donius for being our guest today and sharing some really amazing insights. And we've all learned that Jeff's a dog times two, and I'm a dog and a dolphin, or maybe a dolphin in a dog's body, but certainly a different way of thinking of things, and some pretty cool stuff going on. So we'll look forward to seeing you next week and every week here at freewebinarwednesdays.com. The recording will be up and available here shortly, so feel free to share it with friends and colleagues, and maybe run them through the exercise and see what they come up with. I think you might be intrigued, and I'm definitely going to run the spouse test next time I see Alicia and see what she thinks, if I'm more like a dog or a dolphin. So thanks for that advice. So that concludes today's show, and we'll see you next week. Thanks again, everybody. Bye-bye.